You ever watch your own daughter stand in front of 200 guests at her wedding, the one you secretly paid for, and publicly mock you like a punchline? That happened to me. At 66 years old, I was called a midlife crisis in heels, laughed at for daring to build something after divorce. I smiled, heartbreaking as the guests chuckled, thinking I was just a sweet old woman with delusions of grandeur. What none of them knew, including my daughter, her smug new husband, and half the tech execs in that room, was that I wasn't just a hobbyist. I was their boss. And the moment my identity was revealed, the laughter died so fast you could hear forks hit the floor. But to understand how we got there, how a forgotten housewife became a CEO feared by the very people mocking her, you need to hear everything from the beginning. Because this isn't just a story about revenge. It's about reclaiming power at any age. At 66, I never expected to be starting over, alone. But there I was, sitting in the silence of my tiny kitchen, watching the steam curl up from a chipped mug of tea, with no one left to talk to but the clock ticking on the wall. After 40 years of marriage, my husband traded me in for someone who still wore eyeliner without reading glasses. He said it was mutual, that we'd grown apart. But it didn't feel mutual when he packed his golf clubs and his new hair dye into the back of her SUV while I stood at the window in my bathrobe, clutching a marriage certificate that meant nothing now. Before I became a wife and mother, I was a damn good pharmacist, top of my class, organized, respected. I managed a whole department, trained new staff, kept dangerous medications from being mishandled. But when my daughter Lucy was born and my husband's career took off, I did what women of my generation were told was noble. I stepped back. I gave up my white coat for aprons and calendars full of dentist appointments and PTA meetings. I told myself I was building a home, but when that home dissolved into silence and divorce paperwork, I realized I had no resume, no references, no identity beyond being someone's mother or someone's ex-wife. And even that role was slipping. Lucy had grown into a sharp, polished young woman who worked in PR and considered me a relic of the past. She visited out of obligation, not warmth, and avoided talking about anything deeper than weather. When I brought up the idea of starting a business, her reaction was a polite smile, the kind you give a child who claims they'll be an astronaut. "Oh, Mom," she said once, stirring her oat milk latte. "Maybe just enjoy life now, you know. Take a painting class or travel. You've done enough." Done enough? My heart ached at that phrase, as if my usefulness had expired, like an old coupon at the back of a drawer. I didn't argue, I rarely did. But in the quiet, I started writing. Lists, ideas, business plans. Because what people forgot was that 40 years of running a household, balancing budgets, managing chaos, and solving 1,000 crises had taught me more about operations and efficiency than any MBA. I started small. I called it Green & Co., a nod to my maiden name. No family tie, no traceable connection to Margaret, the tired divorcee with gray hair and elastic waistbands. I worked late into the night from my living room, researching small businesses, cold emailing local shops, offering free consultations to get my foot in the door. I taught myself digital tools, designed invoices, read every business book I could find. It was slow, tedious, lonely, but it was mine. And yet no one knew. Not Lucy, not the neighbors who assumed I spent my days watching soap operas and clipping coupons, not the old friends who stopped calling once I wasn't part of a couple anymore. People saw me and assumed I was surviving on alimony and nostalgia, filling time until the inevitable bingo nights and senior cruises. There was a moment, at the grocery store, of all places, when I overheard two women from my old bridge group whisper about me. "She looks thinner," one said. "Well, she's alone now, probably doesn't cook real meals." And I heard she's working again? Something about helping shops? Isn't that sad? I stood frozen in the canned soup aisle, gripping a can of lentils like it was the last thing tethering me to dignity. I didn't confront them. What would be the point? Their words weren't malicious, just dismissive, like I was already fading from relevance, a background character in my own life. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Green & Co. had just signed its third major contract. I had quietly helped a failing bakery triple their profits by restructuring their inventory and scheduling. A local bookstore now ran smoother than ever, thanks to my input. I wasn't just helping shops. I was building something, brick by invisible brick. And still, I kept it to myself, maybe out of fear, maybe out of pride, maybe because somewhere deep down, I wanted to wait until I had something so undeniable, so irrefutable, that when I finally said, "Look what I did," no one could pat me on the head and call it cute. I didn't want their permission. I wanted their silence. Before I became invisible, I was indispensable, though no one would have admitted it. 10 years ago, my husband's company was circling the drain. He'd made bad hires, signed contracts he didn't understand, and ignored months of red flags. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, watching him hold his head in his hands, muttering about bankruptcy. And then he looked at me. Not out of desperation, but entitlement. "You're good with systems," he'd said. "Just take a look at the books, will you?" I did more than look. I built a new infrastructure from the ground up. I streamlined his inventory process, renegotiated contracts, and ran silent audits on the staff. I worked under a fake consulting email so no one would question a housewife stepping into board meetings. In 3 months, the company went from bleeding cash to breaking even. 6 months later, it was profitable again. He stood on a stage at an industry conference that year, holding a plaque for Turnaround of the Year, and thanked everyone, except me. "My team really pulled through," he beamed. "We restructured hard and fast." I sat in the back row in flats and a cardigan, clapping politely. No one knew it was me. I hadn't even asked for credit, but the sting stayed. When we divorced, I didn't ask for a penny. Not out of pride, but exhaustion. I didn't want his money. I wanted my name back, my air, my space. And the moment the ink dried, I signed a new contract with myself. That's when M. Green was born, a pseudonym, a fresh slate. It wasn't just a name, it was armor. The business registration didn't link back to my personal details. My invoices were signed with initials. My email signature was gender neutral. People assumed I was a retired executive, maybe even a man, fine by me. I wasn't interested in being the face of anything, just the brain. Lucy had no idea. To her, I was the woman who once packed peanut butter sandwiches into lunchboxes, not someone who now negotiated B2B logistics for supply chains. In fact, my first real contract, the one that gave Green & Coers the credibility it needed, almost didn't happen. The client was a local design studio, bleeding money on materials and clueless about scalability. I needed startup capital to execute the solution, but banks saw me as a pensioner with delusions. No one would back me, except Gerald. To everyone in the neighborhood, Gerald was just the sweet old man who walked his dog at 6 a.m. We'd fallen into a routine, passing each other during morning walks, trading weather comments, then deeper talks. He was a retired engineer who lived modestly in a small white bungalow, a widower with kind eyes and an unmatched memory for trivia. One morning, I vented. I didn't mean to, but the frustration poured out about the bank rejections, the business roadblock, the way people spoke to me like I was running a bake sale, not a company. He listened silently, then said, "What's your ROI projection?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" "For the contract," he said casually. "If you had the capital, how fast would you make it back?" We ended up talking for 2 hours on a park bench. I showed him my spreadsheets, the proposal deck, even the market research. He asked sharp, pointed questions. By the end of it, he said, "I'll wire you $20,000 tomorrow. I don't need equity. Just a handshake." I stared at him. "Why?" I whispered. "Because I've built something from nothing, Margaret," he said. "And I know what someone looks like when they're doing the real thing." I didn't cry until I got home. That contract was the domino. The studio recovered, then word spread. I got referrals. Real money started flowing in. I kept my promise to Gerald, paid him back in full 6 months later, with interest he refused to accept. No one ever believed in me like that, I told him. Then it's about time, he replied. No one, not Lucy, not my ex, not even the grocery store gossips, knew that while they were pitying me for being a washed-up divorcee, I had already built a client list, hired 2 part-time analysts, and was preparing to scale. But it was lonely. Every dinner was eaten in silence. Every victory celebrated alone. I got so used to solitude that I stopped checking my phone for messages. No one was calling anyway. The world had written me off, boxed me into a demographic category, senior, divorced, retired. But I wasn't done. And something deep inside told me soon they'd all know. The invitations were embossed in gold foil, white linen envelopes with calligraphy so delicate it made my own name look foreign. Lucy spared no expense. She and Ethan had chosen an elegant estate-turned wedding venue nestled in the countryside, complete with chandeliers that cost more than my car and a string quartet that played soft renditions of Taylor Swift. I paid for most of it. Lucy never asked outright, but there were hints. Ethan's parents already paid for the dress, she'd said, and we're trying to keep the reception magical, but we're a bit over budget. I transferred the money without hesitation, not because I was trying to buy love, but because I remembered my own wedding, how happy I'd been, how naive. I wanted Lucy to have her day free of stress, even if she didn't know the funds came from Greenencoit and not a dusty divorce settlement. A week before the big day, over coffee at a trendy cafe, Lucy looked up from her color-coded seating chart and said, "Mom, can I ask one thing?" "Of course," I replied, already bracing myself. "At the wedding, could you not mention your business?" I blinked. She smiled, trying to soften the blow. "It's just, Ethan's family is very traditional. His dad's an executive, and they can be a little, old school. I don't want them thinking you're trying to reinvent yourself or something. Just say you're retired. Keep things simple." My heart pinched. "You don't want them to know I work?" "I just don't want them asking questions. You know how people are. And honestly, Mom, it's not like you're running Apple. It's cute what you're doing, but let's not make it a thing." I swallowed every word I wanted to say and nodded. The day of the wedding arrived like a dream. The estate sparkled. Lucy looked breathtaking in her lace gown, her cheeks glowing with joy. I stood beside her during the final touches, holding the train of her dress as the photographer snapped away. "You look beautiful," I whispered. "Thanks, Mom," she replied absently, already checking her lipstick in the mirror. I spent the ceremony smiling through tears. Watching her say, "I do," stirred something maternal and proud in me. Despite everything, she was my daughter, my only child. I would have carried the weight of the world to make her happy. The reception began with champagne, hors d'oeuvres passed on silver trays, and guests mingling under fairy lights strung across the garden. I stayed to the side, chatting quietly with a few cousins, keeping my smile polite and warm. Every time someone asked what I'd been up to, I offered vague answers about keeping busy and enjoying some projects. Then came the speeches. The maid of honor, Lucy's college roommate Kendra, was first. She was tipsy, high on attention, and armed with a microphone. "Before I get too emotional," she began, "I just want to say how beautiful everything is. And of course, we can't talk about Lucy without talking about her amazing mom." My stomach tightened. I reached for my glass of water. Kendra continued, "Now, Margaret has been going through what we affectionately call her golden girl glow-up." Laughter rippled across the tables. Seriously, she's in her 60s and suddenly thinks she's a business mogul. It's adorable. We're all just glad she has something to keep her busy between Tai Chi and gardening. More laughter. A few glances in my direction. I smiled tightly. "She even has this mysterious little company now. What's it called again, Lucy?" "Oh, right. Green something." She made air quotes with her fingers. "Like, we get it. Empty nest syndrome hits hard." I looked at my daughter. Lucy was laughing, not nervously, not politely, genuinely. She was nodding along, eyes twinkling. The microphone passed to Lucy herself. "Thanks, Kendra. That was hilarious," she said. "But yes, it's true. My mom has been on quite the little journey lately." She turned to face the room, speaking as if delivering a stand-up routine. "She wakes up early now, always talking about client calls and invoices. Honestly, we think she's just bored. I mean, building a business at her age?" Lucy chuckled. "Some dreams come with expiration dates, but we love her for trying." I could feel my breath catch in my throat. People were laughing, clinking glasses. Someone near the back muttered, "At least she's not doing pyramid schemes." I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap. My smile was still there, but it had hollowed out. The laughter washed over me like acid rain, slow, corroding, impossible to stop. My heart wasn't just broken, it was crushed, folded in on itself. And then Ethan appeared beside me, his champagne glass in hand. He leaned in, patted my shoulder like I was a well-behaved child, and said with a smirk, "Hey, no hard feelings, right? We're all just having fun. And honestly, it's kind of inspiring. Most women your age are knitting. At least you're staying active. That's something." I looked at him. Really looked. The smugness, the patronizing tilt of his head, the subtle wince in his smile like being associated with me was a mild inconvenience. I wanted to scream, to stand up and announce to the entire room who I was, what I had built, that their precious Ethan reported to a company I owned, that half the guests worked for me and didn't even know it. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I smiled. Because sometimes the best revenge is letting them think they've won, right before the curtain drops. I was still smiling when the server set down the main course, chicken breast with lemon beurre blanc, a side of roasted vegetables arranged like edible art. Around me, laughter continued to float through the air like perfume, cloying and inescapable. No one noticed I hadn't touched my fork. As the clinking of silverware filled the tent, Lucy stood again, this time to introduce the couple's special highlight slideshow, a digital reel of childhood photos, dating memories, and clips of their engagement in Italy. The projector hummed to life, the screen flickering with images of Lucy in pigtails, Ethan in high school sports gear, and their polished engagement shoot under olive trees. Music played softly in the background, something orchestral and forgettable. And then it happened. A black screen flashed for barely 2 seconds, in white, bold text, "Sponsored by M. Green, exclusive event partner." It was meant to be a private credit slide, inserted at the end of the reel for record keeping, but some mistake had pulled it forward mid-play. I froze. So did Lucy. She scrambled to the laptop perched beside the DJ, whispering frantically. The screen cut to black. A few guests murmured, confused, but Lucy's smile returned like a mask and she raised her glass. "Well, that's enough nostalgia," she laughed. "Let's get back to the party." But the damage was done. Across the room, I caught the eye of a man in a navy blazer. He blinked at me, then did a double take. I recognized him immediately. Harold Finch, a former client. I'd helped his logistics firm triple its delivery speed over a 3-month contract. He'd once called me a magician with numbers. He made his way toward me, a smile already forming, but Lucy intercepted him. "Hi, so glad you could make it," she said brightly, placing a hand on his arm. "Have you met Ethan's uncle?" Harold hesitated. "Actually, I was hoping to say hello to—" "Oh, let me introduce you to someone who just flew in from Boston," Lucy chirped, steering him away before he could finish. She didn't even glance at me. I stared after them, heart pounding. One person noticing, that was fine. Coincidence. But then it happened again. Later, as dessert was being served, a woman with silver hair approached me cautiously. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I don't mean to be rude, but... Are you Monsieur Green? The consultant?" I blinked. "Yes." "Oh my goodness." Her eyes widened with warmth. You helped my son's tech startup last year. He still uses your automation framework. I can't believe I didn't realize sooner. What a pleasure to meet you in person." I smiled, genuinely this time. "That means a lot. Thank you." She opened her mouth to say more, but before she could, Lucy appeared at my side, her voice syrupy sweet. "Mom, could you come help me with the gifts table real quick?" she asked, not even looking at the woman. "Of course," I said. We walked toward the back of the tent. I waited until we were out of earshot, then turned to her. "You don't want people to know who I am." She didn't answer, just adjusted the flowers on the table. "Do you realize how many of your guests work for companies in my portfolio?" I asked, voice calm. "Do you know how many of them owe their paychecks indirectly to the woman you just spent half an hour mocking?" "Please don't make a scene," she said quietly. I laughed once, bitter and low. "I didn't make the scene, Lucy. You did. When you reduced my life to a punchline, when you asked me to lie about who I am, when you erased the fact that I paid for this entire day." Her head snapped toward me. "You what?" I stared at her, my voice steady. "Every invoice, every vendor, the venue, the dress, the catering, all of it. It wasn't your father, it wasn't Ethan. It was me." She stared at me like I'd just spoken another language. "But the transfers came from a business account." "Green and Co.?" I said softly. Her lips parted. "M. Green? That's you?" I didn't reply. I didn't have to. Lucy looked away, jaw tightening. "You should have told me." "Would it have mattered?" I asked. "Would you have invited me to stand on stage and speak about it? Would you have celebrated me, or still asked me to sit quietly and smile while you turned me into a joke?" She didn't answer, and that said everything. I left her standing beside the table, staring down at a pile of unwrapped gifts. Back at my seat, Ethan's mother leaned toward me, smiling kindly. "It's wonderful to see how involved you've been," she said. "I heard you helped organize the vendors. You're clearly a woman of many talents." I nodded, accepting the compliment, but didn't elaborate. I'd learned my lesson. People see only what they're ready to accept. For now, I would let them stay in the dark a little longer, but it hurt, more than I'd expected. I thought I could endure the jokes, the dismissal, the sheer arrogance of youth wrapped in lace and tuxedos. But knowing that even the moments of joy, like funding the wedding, securing the dream venue, helping make her fantasy real, had been used as a way to keep me invisible, that broke something deeper than pride. It scraped at love. And yet, something else stirred too, a reckoning. I could feel it rising like a tide behind my ribs. Not revenge, not spite. Something cleaner, something inevitable. Soon they would see. I stayed seated, the remnants of the cake heavy on my tongue, as the buzz around me changed tone. What had been laughter now felt like shifting sand, unstable. And then he appeared. Mr. Frank Dawson, Ethan's boss, approached. Tall, steady, with an air of professionalism that suggested he was used to commanding attention. I recognized him immediately from his reputation, a no-nonsense executive in the technology sector. He offered a polite nod and said, "Mrs. Green, may I have a word?" I paused. Everyone called me Margaret, not Mrs. Green, but I followed him behind a pillar into a quieter corner of the hall. His gaze was sharp. "I've been hearing your name," he began, uncertain yet curious. "Margaret Green? You've got quite a reputation." "Margaret," I corrected softly, forcing calm. "Let's just say a client contacted me a few months ago." He leaned in. "Actually, a senior member of our board dug through a vendor proposal and found a note. You, representing an acquisition group. They say M. Green is closing in on a strategic buyout of Sterling Tech." My heart stuttered. "I work there," Frank said slowly. He lowered his voice to a murmur. "I'm actually one of the senior directors in the company." I pressed my lips together to keep silence from spilling out. He continued, But I had no clue. No one had any idea Monsieur Green was the same person I see tonight. You haven't... this is a shock. I drew in a breath. Surprise can be a tool, I murmured. Frank's expression shifted from shock to something steadier, more respectful. You've kept it discreet, but the contracts, the acquisitions, they've been substantial. We both knew he wasn't just being polite. He was trying to process how a frail-seeming wedding guest, an older woman in modest heels, was the shadow behind the transactions he'd spent months vetting. Tentatively, he cleared his throat. We deserve the truth. I understand this is your daughter's day, but you should have told her. I looked toward the dance floor. Lucy was laughing, swirling Ethan around. It was as if her world existed inside a bubble that excluded me. Frank placed a hand on my shoulder, a weight heavier than he meant it to be. Margaret, people should respect you, not just for who you are, but what you've achieved. Emotion choked me. I nodded once, so faintly he might not have noticed. Can I tell them? He asked, as if reading my conflict. Would you like me to? It was tempting and terrifying. I won't refuse you, I answered. Frank drew himself up. With measured confidence, he stepped onto the miniature stage where someone had set aside a microphone and paused the music. He tapped it gently, and the room quieted in an instant. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice steady, rich, resonating. I'd like to interrupt this celebration briefly, not to overshadow the bride and groom, but because something remarkable needs acknowledging. All heads turned toward us. Lucy stopped dancing and stared. I rose slowly, breath steady, shoulders square. As many of you have joked tonight, Frank continued, Margaret Green is a charming, energetic woman, a mother with a second wind in her 60s. Laughter lulled uneasily. But what most of you don't know, he paused, is that Mrs. Green is not just anyone. She is M. Green, the founder and managing director of Green & Cocrini, and the principal investor behind the companies most of us work for, including the company where your son works, Ethan, Sterling Tech. Gasps rattled through the crowd. Lucy's hand flew to her mouth. Frank looked at me. Mrs. Green, would you like to say more? I approached the mic with shaking steps, silence full around me. Thank you, Frank, I said clearly. I paused, swallowed, then continued. I understand that tonight was supposed to be about my daughter and her new husband. It already is. I looked pointedly at Lucy, eyes catching hers across the room. But I also know how easy it is to reduce someone's identity to a stereotype. You thought I was a doting mother, past her prime, but I wasn't. I still am not. A kid near the front leaned in, confusion plain on his face. I cleared my throat. Green & Co, that's me. I acquired Sterling Tech 3 months ago. I also built a logistics platform for Hardy's Bakery out on Main Street. Out of modest beginnings, I built a portfolio that now employs hundreds and touches lives in ways I never dreamed possible after my divorce. I glanced at Lucy again. Her expression hovered between shame and awe. Tonight you laughed, I continued. You said I had midlife delusions. But I didn't need validation. I just needed a chance. And I carved that chance out, quietly from the margins, so that I could stand here today, unapologetically. Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes, not for attention, but because I was claiming space I'd earned. The room held its breath. Some guests looked stunned. Others stood slowly, applause blossoming across tables. Lucy's face crumpled. Ethan looked pale. Lucy's best friend began whispering, "She's amazing." Frank stepped forward and put an arm around me. "This belongs to you," he whispered. And in that moment, I felt grounded. The laughter had turned. Not at me, but for me. The air felt electric, the room divided between stunned silence and burgeoning murmurs. I steadied myself at the microphone, feeling Frank's supportive presence behind me. Frank cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, I must confess, I once had an email exchange with Monsieur Green regarding vendor terms. I declined the proposal. I thought it was just a supplier. I had no idea it was you standing on this stage tonight. The room rippled with unspoken guilt, a collective gasp. I could see someone's face blanch as they touched their chest in surprise. Frank's blunt admission pierced the veneer of civility. Frank continued, his voice calm but unmistakably loaded. To think I turned down my own boss, at least in principle. My lips curved into a small, vindicated smile. Shock and rage were giving way to something more like triumph. Then a figure stirred at the side of the crowd, a tall, sharply dressed woman with a steely gaze. She parted through the guests with quiet purpose and stopped in front of me. I recognized her immediately. Veronica Hayes, CEO of Tomorrow Tech. We had sparred over acquisition terms 2 months ago. I'd outmaneuvered her in boardroom negotiations. She wasn't just present, she was a direct competitor. Veronica's eyes locked with mine. For a moment, I thought she would expose the whole facade. But then, looking around, realization dawned on her. Her jaw tightened and she slowly nodded, recognition replacing intent. She turned, gave one curt nod to Frank, and sank back into the crowd, mouth pinched. My pulse thundered. The stakes had just gotten higher. Not only had I carved my place in the business world, but competitors and colleagues alike were reconsidering what they thought they knew. Ethan's face twisted with confusion. He marched toward the stage, chest taut. I could sense what he intended, to rewrite the narrative, to spin damage control. But Frank raised his hand, not unkindly. "Please, Ethan," Frank said. "We are talking with the owner." Ethan faltered. I felt every pair of eyes anchor on me, some curious, some guilty, some reverent. The tone of the room had shifted completely. "Yes," I said, voice clear. "The owner." I lifted the microphone again. A little earlier, someone asked me why I kept quiet, why I let myself be mocked as delusional and irrelevant. I paused. Laughter had turned into hushed confusion. Because I knew I wasn't done building. Because the truth doesn't need applause. It needs patience. I scanned the room, seeing faces fall from amusement into disbelief. Lucy sat pale-faced, realization and regret brewing in her eyes. Ethan looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last 5 seconds. Scattered applause broke through, cautious, then louder, spreading table by table. I lowered my eyes, then looked back up. So yes, I'm Emma Green. I fund companies. I lead operations. I hold board seats. I am the storm you didn't prepare for. The crowd went silent again, then erupted into full applause. More heartfelt now, respect replacing condescension. Veronica stood up, half in grudging respect, half in stunned recognition. Even competitors acknowledged the force behind the name. Ethan approached, hand shaking. "Mom, I had no idea." I took a breath. "Ethan," I said, "this isn't about being a mother. It's about being a person worth noticing." He swallowed whole. "I'm sorry." I nodded. No lecture necessary. Frank tapped the mic again. "Let's hear it for one of the sharpest business minds I've ever met." The crowd cheered. I stepped away from the mic and sat down, heart pounding with vindication. The emotional arc had flipped. Shame became strength. Invisibility became power. The night resumed, but without the same laughter. Conversations carried my name with respect now. Business cards were exchanged. Some hands shook mine with genuine warmth, others with awe. Lucy glided over, face flushed. "Mom," she said, voice trembling, I was wrong." I looked at her, tears threatening, but held still. "I hope this means something to you," I said, softer than I looked. "But I don't need it." She nodded, tears breaking free now. "I'm so sorry." "You'll learn," I said. "Sometimes it takes being wrong to understand what strength looks like." She nodded again, dignity returning. The night faded toward its close. I stood by the window, looking out at the garden lights, hearing laughter again, but this time as background, not at me. For the first time since I'd begun this journey, I felt seen, not as a delusion, not as an aunt to pity. I had finally tested their assumptions, and won. The music had returned, light, hushed, maybe even celebratory, but I barely heard it. My heart pounded with a mixture of relief and reverent stillness. Frank's earlier declaration had shattered silence like a starting gun, sending ripples through the hall. Now I had to step forward again. I took a steadying breath and rose from my seat. Every pair of eyes turned my way, some still wide with shock, others more curious, searching for meaning. Frank stepped aside as I approached the microphone that glowed softly on the petite stage. I briefly closed my eyes, picturing the years I'd spent alone, building a company behind a pseudonym, enduring invisible humiliation. In that silent gathering of gazes, I found clarity. "Thank you," I began, voice firm but gentle, "to everyone here. Especially those who laughed tonight. I want you to know why I chose to remain silent." A hush fell. The hum of music faded entirely. I could feel Lucy's eyes burning into my back, Ethan's neck stiff with regret. But wherever my words landed, they needed to be authentic. "For decades, I stepped back," I continued. "I gave everything I had to marriage, family, motherhood. I was proud to do it. But after divorce, after watching my identity dissolve, I realized something had to change." I paused, pulling strength from memory. I held back from speaking up for myself, not because I lacked skill, but because I prized harmony over recognition. I thought humility would protect me, so I let others write my story, the housewife, the retiree, the outdated mother. I glanced at Lucy, whose expression cracked, guilt and disbelief mingling. When I started Green & Co., I signed emails with M. Green. I kept my name, my gender, my face out of it. I believed quiet competence would speak louder than any spotlight ever could. I heard a breath catch near the front rows. The crowd shifted, leaning in. "But silence can be mistaken for consent," I added. "If you never say who you are, people fill in the blanks with their assumptions, and assumptions can become prison walls." My throat tightened. I swallowed. This wasn't just a confession, it was a reckoning. When I raised my eyes again, I saw strangers nodding, some even tearing up. The weight of expectation, the inherited judgments, all of that hung in the room, heavier now because it was witnessed. "I didn't choose this moment to expose myself," I said. "I chose this moment to show you how transformative visibility can be." I allowed a soft smile, because there's something powerful about being seen for who you are, without shame or diminishment. I stepped down from the stage, the applause starting small and deliberate, polite at first, but swelling with respect. It wasn't about performance, it was about recognition. Lucy stood, her face pale as she approached. "Mom," she whispered, voice thick. "I'm so sorry." Tears brimmed in my eyes. Understandable, after hours of silent grief and unexpected vindication. "It's okay," I replied quietly. This moment matters more than any apology." Behind us, Ethan's frame seemed to shrink with remorse. He cleared his throat. Mom, I had no idea." He paused, searching my face. "I understand now. You didn't want to eclipse my day, but you gave me everything. Love, support, and now, courage. Thank you." My heart clenched, but I nodded, accepting his words. This wasn't about us anymore. It was about rewriting the narrative. The evening regained its rhythm, yet with a different beat. Conversations bloomed around me. Guests approached with renewed warmth and respectful curiosity. Many business professionals now saw me not as an eccentric detail, but as a force. A few whispered things like, "She's a legend," or "I didn't see it coming." I met their eyes, held mine steady. Let them see beyond the facade. I later found Gerald, my silent investor and friend, among the crowd. He smiled, small but proud. I slipped a hand into his. "Thank you," I mouthed, No applause needed. We understood. As the music resumed and couples rejoined the dance floor, I realized my story had changed. Tonight, I hadn't just reclaimed power, I owned my identity and invited others to see me fully. Lucy joined me on the balcony later, outside the tent lights. Her voice was soft, remorseful. I was so wrong. I thought I was protecting you. I know, I replied, but you never needed protection. You just needed to see. She wiped her eyes, nodding. I see you now. The night ended with warmth, not the hollow kind. Quiet apologies, real pride, new beginnings. The air was thick with emotion, a gallery of reactions ranging from tightened jaws to widened eyes. The applause had died down to soft hums, and the golden chandeliers above seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. I stood on the stage, eyes scanning the faces, some remorseful, some curious, many stunned. Frank, ever my ally, offered me a small nod. Then he stepped aside. I took a firm breath and didn't reach for the microphone. Instead, with steady hands, I held up my tablet, quietly connected to the venue's AV system. A hush swept the room again as the projector flickered to life. 1 minute of visuals began, seamless and cinematic. A logo appeared first, Green and Cohen Mars, clean, confident, understated. Then came images. A bustling bakery transformed, smiles and stock orders rising, a logistics company operating like a well-oiled machine under streamlined strategy, Sterling Tech's boardroom, energetic, vibrant, modern. Real businesses, real outcomes, real impact. In muted tones, the narration played over the sequence. This is Green and Cohen, built from reinvention, not inheritance. Here are just a few companies we've revitalized. Images shifted fast, report charts climbing, contented staff members, executives shaking hands with me. Then subtly, the final slide appeared. A close-up of my name, the words slowly typed out across the screen. I was once the woman forgotten. Now I choose to live a life no one can ignore. The room was still. No applause, no gasps, just silence, raw and real. I looked at Lucy first. Her face was pale, her mouth open, eyes brimming with something I could only identify as regret. I didn't speak. I turned and walked off the stage, the hum of the hall growing distant as I exited through a side door. The clip continued playing to an emptying stage, but I'd left. I didn't need applause. I'd said what needed saying. In that brief silence, hearts were shifting. The first to erupt was not Lucy, but a businessman from the back, suddenly standing, fists clenched, voice fierce as he shouted, "You turned us all, a room full of strangers, into believers." Another voice added, "That was not modesty, that was mastery." The crowd followed. Applause built, booming over the clip's final message. Women and men rose from their tables, ringing with respect and something fiercer, admiration. Then came whispers about betrayal, directed at Lucy. Her friends exchanged looks of shame, some covering their mouths as realization and guilt slowly took hold. The mocking laughter of earlier speeches felt like betrayal now. The hall crackled with a collective regret, a recognition that blind assumptions can wound deeply. I found myself outside in the cool night air, near a simple side entrance, feeling the weight of what just happened, and of what was still just beginning. A few guests drifted out behind me, echoing applause still rising inside. Gerald found me, as he often did. He listened to the distant sound of the crowd, then looked at me with quiet pride. "You knocked it out of the park," he said quietly. I nodded, throat tight. I didn't call attention to myself. I just showed who I actually am. He offered his arm, and for a moment we stood in companionable silence as the applause faded, replaced by whispered conversations and the rustle of chairs being pushed back. Inside, amidst the ebbing echoes, Lucy and Ethan stepped out too. Lucy approached me cautiously, shame in her posture, tears glistening. "Margaret," she began, voice trembling, "I was awful. I treated you like a side note in my life story." I turned to her, meeting her eyes. The anger I felt had softened into something deeper, understanding, still tempered by hurt. "You didn't know," I said softly. "You saw me through your lens, not mine." Her lip quivered. I was blind. "Then wake up," I told her gently, "but don't expect me to stay invisible anymore." She nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I don't. I want to make it right." Ethan joined us, eyes red and voice thick. I underestimated you, Mom, and I can't ever undo that, but I promise I'll never do it again." Something in his tone echoed sincerity. I nodded again, accepting. We stood there, 3 generations, all changed. Not healed yet, but starting. Inside, the reception had quieted into thoughtful chatter. Some guests talked business, not out of obligation, but curiosity and respect. Others spoke in hushed tones about the power of assumptions and the cost of laughter. And Lucy, she sat quietly at her own wedding table. The world in her lap changed. Facing the consequences of laughter turned cruel. As I walked toward the exit later, my shoes clicking softly on the polished floor, I realized something. The night hadn't ended with confessions and applause. It ended with a choice. Do I let the world define me or define myself? I chose the latter. Outside, the cool night air met me with calm, steady breeze. I took a deep breath, feeling rejuvenated, fierce, reclaimed. Because a moment of revelation isn't always about loud transformation. It's about quiet reclamation. The wind that swept through the small coastal town carried a salty, liberating scent. Waves crashed gently against the docks, and the sun warmed the painted shutters of the seaside shops. It had been 4 months since the wedding, and Margaret was finally home. Not the home of silent dinners and dismissive glances, a real one, a new one. She stepped into the refurbished building nestled beside a row of boutiques and bookstores. Once an abandoned inn, it was now the headquarters of her next chapter, the Phoenix Center, named not for myth, but for truth, a place where women over 55 could learn, grow, and rise again. The main floor gleamed with freshly polished wood and sunlight filtering through wide windows. At one end, a conference room was adorned with sleek, modern furniture. At the other, a cozy lounge with bookshelves full of business, tech, and leadership titles, alongside memoirs by women who had defied time and expectation. Margaret walked past a row of desks. Women of all shapes and shades, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, were seated at computers, deeply focused on online marketing strategies or accounting workshops. Laughter floated occasionally between them, low, confident, free. Each woman here had been dismissed once, called past her prime or better off retired. Now they were building resumes, pitching projects, launching side businesses with seed funding Margaret had helped secure. She walked to her private office, modest in size but filled with warmth. Behind her desk, a painting of a phoenix in brushstroke reds and golds spanned the wall. Below it, a framed newspaper article with the headline, "Mystery CEO M. Green Revealed as Business Powerhouse." On her desk, the computer chimed. A new email had arrived. From Lucy. Margaret paused before clicking it open. Subject, "I'm sorry and I mean it." She opened it slowly, eyes scanning each word with cautious curiosity. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your time. I know an email isn't enough. But I've been thinking about that night. Your video, your silence, your strength, and it haunts me. I thought I knew everything about you. I didn't know anything at all. You were building something extraordinary, and I was mocking it. Mocking you. There's no excuse, just the truth. I was insecure. Seeing you rise while I was planning a wedding made me feel small. So I tried to make you feel smaller. I don't want our relationship to end at that reception. I want to start again, this time by listening. Please let me visit. Love, Lucy." Margaret sat still, fingers resting gently on the mouse. Her heart ached, but not with pain. It ached with space, opening. Forgiveness, she knew, wasn't a gift you gave someone else. It was a gift you gave yourself. She wouldn't respond yet. Not until the ache settled into something steady. Later that afternoon, she joined a seminar in the main training hall. The whiteboard read, "Starting Smart After 60, a beginner's guide to purposeful entrepreneurship." A woman named Joy, 67, recently divorced, with hands calloused from a lifetime of caregiving, was presenting her plan to open a dog treat business using recipes passed down from her grandmother. Another woman, Beatrice, asked about e-commerce platforms. Margaret didn't speak much. She didn't need to. They were doing what she once did, quietly, steadily, rewriting their storylines. No applause necessary. After the seminar, Margaret walked along the dock. Gerald joined her holding 2 cups of tea. He handed her one without a word. "Busy day?" he asked. She nodded. Busy in the best way. He sipped and glanced at the sea. "I heard Lucy reached out." Margaret gave a faint smile. She did. Going to let her in? Eventually, but not as the same daughter and not as the same mother. He smiled, sensing the layers behind her words. Good. New rules. They walked in silence a while longer, the sun slipping low into the water, casting everything in a warm, forgiving gold. Margaret paused and looked out at the horizon. "I spent too long waiting for permission to matter," she said softly. "And now?" Gerald asked. She turned to him, eyes shining. "Now I build a world where no one has to." A knock tapped gently on the glass door of the Phoenix Center. Margaret glanced up from her desk, expecting another delivery or perhaps a woman interested in joining the program. Instead, she saw 3 familiar faces standing nervously outside. It took a few moments for recognition to bloom, and when it did, her breath caught. 3 of Lucy's bridesmaids, the same young women who had laughed during the wedding speech, the same ones who giggled when Lucy joked about Margaret's late-life empire-building hobby, the same ones who barely acknowledged her afterward. Margaret stood slowly, composed. She opened the door. "Hello," said the tallest one. Andrea, if memory served, her tone far more subdued than the bubbly arrogance Margaret remembered. "We saw an article about your center," Andrea continued, "and we'd like to apply to join your next session." Margaret blinked. "You're interested in the training?" The woman beside her, Maria, nodded. "We left our jobs earlier this year. Burnout, layoffs, everything. And honestly, after that night, we started looking you up, learning about what you've built." Margaret folded her arms, studying their faces. They were different now, eyes softer, pride carefully tucked away. But the image of them toasting to her humiliation still lingered. "I appreciate your interest," she said, voice even. "But this program wasn't designed for apologies. It's for women willing to do the real work. All of it." Andrea stepped forward. "We are willing. We just didn't realize who you were or what you were doing. That night, it changed us." Margaret gave a polite, non-committal smile. "We'll be in touch." She didn't promise more. She didn't owe more. They left, heads bowed slightly, not in shame, but in recognition. And that, perhaps, was a beginning. That evening, she sat alone in her small seaside home, the fireplace crackling behind her, and reread Lucy's email. Then she opened a folder on her desktop, labeled simply Proof. She clicked on a small audio file. The sound filled the room. "She keeps insisting she's building a business empire, but we're just trying to get her to accept that some dreams have expiration dates." Margaret closed her eyes. The words still cut deep, but not as they once did. Not like a fresh wound, more like an old scar, still tender but healing. She attached the file to an email. Subject, "You asked, why? This is why. Lucy. You asked me why I didn't welcome your apology right away. This is why. Listen to it. Not just the words, but the tone, the laughter, the conviction in your voice. It wasn't just one comment. It was years of dismissal, of being treated like a relic instead of a woman still in motion. I'm not angry anymore, but I need you to understand the depth of what happened that night. We can only begin again if the truth is fully acknowledged. Love. Mom. She hit send. There was no anger in her chest now, no bitterness, only clarity. A week later, the training center buzzed with new energy. Margaret was finishing up a budgeting workshop when Nora, her assistant, stepped in. "There's someone here asking to speak with you," she said. Didn't give her name, just said you'd know. Margaret sighed inwardly, setting down her marker. She walked out into the lobby. Lucy was standing there. No makeup, no designer outfit, just jeans and a soft green sweater, her eyes raw from emotion. "I listened to it," she said quietly. Margaret waited. "I cried through the whole thing," Lucy continued. "Not just because I was ashamed, but because I remembered how easy it felt to say those words, how natural it was to mock you. That's what hurts the most." Margaret said nothing. "I'm not here to beg," Lucy added. "I'm here to say I'm going back to therapy. I'm going to work on why I felt threatened by your strength, why I laughed instead of listened, and I hope, maybe one day, you'll let me try again. But not because I'm your daughter, because I'm willing to be better." Margaret nodded slowly. "That's a good start." They stood there in silence, not as mother and daughter, but as two women confronting a broken past and the possibility of something new. Later that evening, Margaret sat at the end of the pier, notebook in hand, wind teasing her silver hair. She jotted down notes for the next program intake. In the margin, she scribbled, "Growth begins when shame ends." The ocean stretched before her, wide and endless, and for the first time in a long time, Margaret felt exactly the same. The stage lights were bright, but not blinding, illuminating a room filled with anticipation and reverence. The annual Her Conference and Awards 2025 had drawn leaders from across the globe, innovative entrepreneurs, fearless changemakers, and unstoppable women. This year's theme, Elevate. An invitation not just to rise, but to lift others as we ascended. Her program at Know Margaret had arrived quietly, not as a celebrated name on a banner, not as a late bloomer, but as someone who had quietly rewritten her story, and many others. The moment she stepped onto the stage, you could feel a shift in the air. She didn't seek applause. She wasn't introduced with grandeur. Her presence was steady, measured, authentic. The host cleared her throat. "Tonight we honor a woman who didn't wait for validation. She reshaped her world on her own terms. Please welcome the recipient of the Empowerment Leader Award, Margaret Green." A single spotlight followed her as she walked forward. No fanfare, no frills, just poise that spoke louder than words. Margaret stood at the podium, her eyes scanning the sea of faces, some inspired, some grateful, all attentive. "Thank you," she began, her voice calm but resonant. "There's a powerful lesson in choosing not to be seen, and in learning later that being seen doesn't require permission." The room fell silent, hanging on to every word. "I once hid behind a name, M. Green, masking my gender, my history, my scars," she continued, "because I thought humility was safety. But ambition, when fueled by purpose, deserves acknowledgement." Applause rippled gently but grew stronger, because people recognized truth when they heard it. "I didn't seek recognition," Margaret said, "not as an excuse, but as transparency. I wanted impact. I created the Phoenix Center in a seaside town, because no one should be silenced, because reinvention isn't a footnote, it's the headline." A short video played before she spoke, a silent visual ode showing the transformation of everyday women who'd graduated from her programs. The bookstore owner who opened 2 new branches, the retired engineer launching a consultancy, the ex-nurse starting a digital healthcare startup. Faces glowed with pride and confidence, the message unclear but unmistakable. Rebirth is possible at any age. When the video ended, Margaret continued. I'm not here to collect applause. I'm here to show that real change is quieter than showmanship, but deeper. The audience rose, standing ovation filling the hall, not for performance, but for substance. Margaret let the moment linger, letting every woman feel the power of being seen for real. Backstage, Lucy watched from the wings. Her eyes were wet, a rare humility softening her features. She stepped forward, moved by the same quiet power that so deeply unsettled her in the past. Margaret made her exit through a side door, letting the audience's thunder subside behind her. The hush behind that door was full, reverent. Lucy found her, eyes red but steady. "I'm proud of you," Lucy whispered. "I'm sorry for not seeing the woman standing here tonight." Margaret paused, considering. "I didn't need applause, Lucy, just visibility. And now, I am visible." They held each other for a long moment, a mother and a daughter, unlearning old roles. After the ceremony, at the lobby's quiet corner, Margaret mingled, almost incognito. Women approached her, not knowing the CEO behind her florist's hands. Some smiled, some wept. A young entrepreneur whispered, "You saved me." Another said, "Your story gave me courage." Margaret didn't push back with modesty. She let their words fill her as quiet validation. In a dimly lit corner, two conference attendees recognized her from a news article. They both worked for businesses Margaret had acquired. Their admiration was profound, genuine. Margaret turned to leave, stepping into the night air with Lucy beside her. The streets were calm, lamps flickering, the world feeling vast again. "You changed something, Mom," Lucy said. Margaret looked up into the starry sky. "We all changed." The next morning, Margaret sat at her desk in the Phoenix Center, her rebuilt headquarters overlooking the sea. A stack of scheduled interviews lay neatly arranged. Journalists from national magazines, a TV segment about senior entrepreneurship, another keynote invite. But more compelling was the email from Lucy, forwarded again to her from her assistant. "Mom, thank you. I'm rebuilding too. Not because you asked me to, but because I don't want to repeat the past. I love you." Margaret read and put the computer aside. She walked to the window, looking out at the sunrise glittering over the waves. No trophies on the shelf. No trophy case needed. She didn't need anyone to celebrate her anymore. She just needed to keep elevating others. The gala hall buzzed softly with afterglow, the kind that lingers long after applause fades. Glasses clinked, conversations hummed in lower tones, and lights twinkled like captured stars. The Her conference and awards had reached its climax with Margaret's speech, and yet somehow it wasn't over. Backstage, the host approached Margaret, gently obtuse about an award still in her hands. "Margaret," she began, "you're slated to receive the Lifetime Impact Award after your speech." Margaret tilted her head, hiding her surprise. She paused, aware that all eyes seemed to follow her through the folding doors. But then she did something completely unexpected. She stepped aside. "No, thank you," she said, voice quiet but unwavering. The host blinked in confusion. The audience still in the main hall paused as if sensing the shift. Margaret continued with clarity. "I don't deserve that award. Not alone. The work at the Phoenix Center isn't just mine. It's theirs. The women I teach, support, and stand beside. Tonight, I'd like to surrender it to someone more deserving." A murmured, gasping ripple moved through the audience, growing faster than applause. The man from the awards committee frowned, but coughed into a professional smile. "And we'd like you to choose," he pressed. Margaret took a steady breath. She indicated to the main stage. Up on the screen above the podium, a new image flickered into life. A video projection, silent at first, then carrying itself forward in text and visual grace. "Tonight, I pass the honor to someone who embodies what it means to rise despite everything. She's here with me," Margaret announced, her voice firm. She turned and beckoned. From the crowd, a woman in her early 60s, hair streaked with silver, eyes resilient, rose slowly. She stepped onto the stage. In her hands, a notepad, worn but proud. This woman was a single mother. After her husband left, she had lost everything and ended up in one of Margaret's first entrepreneurial cohorts. Tonight, she had relaunched her catering business and hired 5 women in her neighborhood. Margaret walked up and placed the award into her hands. "This," she said, her voice cracking with tenderness, "is the person I'd like to accept this recognition. Because this story isn't about me. It's about all of us who learn to stand when the world says, 'Sit down.'" The audience rose to their feet, not respectful stillness, but joyous affirmation. Margaret stepped back into the wings. Simultaneously, the projection screen displayed words, elegant and confident. "I do not need praise, I need women to stand." The phrase blurred across the hall in graceful type, echoing Margaret's belief that true legacy isn't applause, but empowerment. In the audience, Lucy sat frozen, tears streaked across her cheeks. It was the first time she saw her mother not as a caretaker or absentee entrepreneur, but as a moral force, as a being with self-respect, beyond performative sacrifices. Her hands covered her mouth, absorbing the weight of recognition given away and of the example set. Margaret disappeared into a side corridor, finding Gerald waiting. He embraced her silently, both knowing no words could match the gravity of what had just been accomplished. The night wound down, but Margaret's impact wouldn't fade. News outlets later called it a quiet revolution in self-worth. On the drive home, Lucy reached tenderly for her mother's hand. "I didn't understand," she whispered. Margaret squeezed her palm, steady. "That's okay," she replied. "You're learning now." A few days later, Margaret returned to the Phoenix Center. She sat alone in the lounge overlooking the sea, pages of letters spread around her. Hundreds, from moms turned founders, retirees turned startups, women who'd rebuilt after loss, after doubt, after being told to fade quietly. One letter read, "Dear Ms. Green, you taught me to believe I was more than my divorce. I started my cake business at 58. Last month, I made my first hire. Thank you." Another, "Your words. I choose to live a life no one can ignore." That phrase replayed in my mind every time I felt invisible. "Today, I'm an executive chef. Thank you for seeing me." Margaret felt a warmth that saturated her bones. Not pride, something steadier. Fulfillment. She pushed one final note to the top, handwritten in elegant, deliberate script. "When the world doesn't recognize you, build your own world." She leaned back, eyes soft on the waves. The day was bright, the horizon unbroken, and she had already begun building that world. Final words. When the world does not recognize you, build a new world for yourself.